Welcome, dear students. Assalamu alaikum. Today we'll be taking the section or the practical section of identification of age. We will learn how to identify age from bones and from x-rays. Let's start with this problem as a pre-test. We will answer it in the ending of the presentation. A male aged 22 years was hit by an axe on his head and found unconscious with an axe nearby. How to verify the age of the victim? In order to answer this question, we have to know how to identify this certain age, 22 years, by knowing the age of the events that occur at this age or the year before it, or years before it, the years after it. Okay, so after ending the whole presentation, we will know how to precisely answer this question. Okay. Our objectives today is to estimate the age from skull through its fontanelles and sutures, from mandible and teeth, from the union of epiphysis of upper limbs, lower limbs, and other bones as clavicle, sternum, and hyoid. Before starting, there is this note. Okay, what are ossific centers? What's meant by an ossific center? The ossific center, okay, do you think that babies, when they're formed in the womb, are they formed of bones? No, they start as cartilages and as membranes, then these cartilage and membranes then transform into bones. And this doesn't happen in the blink of an eye. It starts with an ossification center, this word, our ossific center. It's a point in the cartilage or the membrane that starts turning into bones. Then bone starts to deposit all over the cartilage or the membrane, turning it completely into bone. So the point of the start of this ossification process is called the ossific center. Some ossific centers, as you learn in the section of intrauterine fetal age and abortion, start intrauterine in the mother's womb. Others appear after delivery. The first is the ossific center in the head of femur that appears and at the end of the first year. The second is the one at the distal end of radius that appears at the end of the second year. The third is the one that appears in the upper end of radius, appearing at 6 years, and the last is the ossific center at the upper end of the ulna, and this starts as at 12 years. Okay. In the practical exam, how does this section represent itself? It's a picture of a bone or of an x-ray. And you're asked about what is the age, identify the age of this bone, identify the age of the bone in the x-ray, and why, explain your answer. Okay, to comment on the bone, you have to include the name of the bone, and make sure you know this, because if you identify the bone wrong, you will identify the age wrong. If it's a humerus and you mistakenly identified it as femur, you will identify the ages wrong. So you have to study the anatomy very well. You have to know the difference between humerus and femur, between ulna and tibia. So you get what I mean? Because the ages depend completely on the correct identification of bone. You have to mention the part of the bone. Is it the head? Is it the lower end? Is it the shaft? Whatever. Okay? And age and Y, of course. Okay. Remember the golden rule. All ages after puberty, all ages of union mentioned in the box are for males. The females, the ages of union are 2 years earlier, except for 3 bones in the body. What do I mean? If I say that the head of a bone unites with the shaft at 18 years, this means that this occurs in this age in males, while in the female it occurs at 16 years. The females are 2 years ahead, okay, except in three bones: the bones of a skull, its sutures, the sternum, and the sacrum. And this exception has an exception. There is only one suture in the skull that occurs in the that occurs in the girls 2 years ahead. So all the bones in the body, the females are 2 years ahead of the males, except bones of skull, sternum, and sacrum. However, there is one suture in the skull that the normal rule applies to it, where the females are 2 years ahead of males. We will talk about all this later in more details. Okay, we'll start with the skull. There are two features in the skull that I can use to identify age: fontanelles and sutures. What are the fontanelles? The fontanelles are openings, normal openings that God created in the skull in order to allow normal growth and development of the brain in the early part of life, during intrauterine part and the first year of life. There are two openings: the posterior fontanelle at the back of skull and anterior fontanelle. Normally, if the fetus is full term, he is born with an already closed posterior fontanelle, while the anterior fontanelle remains open until 18 to 24 months of life. So if I see a skull this way, the one I see here is the anterior fontanelle. If the anterior fontanelle is open this way, this means that this is a skull of a child or a baby less than 18 to 24 months of life. Okay? Okay. The second feature of a skull that is very helpful in age identification is the closure of sutures. First, what are the sutures? The sutures are the points or the lines where the bones of a skull meet. The skull is not one bone. It's formed of many bones, and those bones meet at lines that are called sutures. We have two frontal bones. We have two parietal bones at the top of the skull. We have an occipital bone at the back of skull. Between those bones there are sutures. There is a frontal suture between the two frontal bones. There is the lambdoid between the occipital and the parietal, and between the two parietal bones there is the sagittal suture. Between the frontal and the parietal there is the coronal sutures. When do these sutures close? Okay, the frontal suture between the two frontal bones close at the age of 3 years. The sagittal suture between the two parietal bones close between the years 25 and 30 years. The coronal suture between the frontal and parietal bones close at the age of 40 years, and the lambdoid suture between the parietal and occipital bones closes at the age of 50 years. And I repeat, the skull is the exception, where the ages of closure are the same for males and females. It doesn't matter whether it's a male skull or a female skull, the sutures close at the same age. The only exception is the suture between the basi-occipital and basi-sphenoidal bones, and this is not in the vault of skull, it's in the skull base. Okay, this suture unites at the age of 23 years in males and at the age of 21 years in females. Okay, here if I look at this bone, what is it? It's a skull. It's the vault of a skull. The first age to close, I want to identify its age, okay? The first age to close at the vault of skull is the frontal suture. If I look at the frontal bone, there is nothing open. There is no suture between the two frontal bones. It looks as if the frontal bone is one bone. Why does this happen? Because when any two bones unite, the suture between them closes, and with time it starts fading and disappearing. So I don't even see a line here. This means that the frontal suture has been closed for a while. So we're definitely beyond 3 years. If I look at the if I look at this part, I see that the sagittal suture is open. This means that we're below 25 years of age. So this is a vault of skull that is older than 3 years because the frontal suture is closed, and it's below 25 years because the sagittal suture is still open. If I look at the skull here, we have to mention something. If you can identify sex from the picture of the bone or from the x-ray, then it's important to modify the age accordingly if there are difference between male and female bones. I remembered this info, I had to tell you it. Okay, if I look at this bone, it's a skull and it's a female skull. Mastoid process is small. If you attended the section of identification of sex, you will know how this is, the frontonasal junction is smooth. Okay, so this is a female skull, but it doesn't actually matter. Okay, because I said that almost all ages of skull sutures close at the same age in males and females, except for one that's it's at the skull base. I can now see it. Okay, let's start looking. Here I can see some sutures. Okay, if I look at the oldest suture or the last to close, it is the lambdoid suture and it's clearly closed. Okay, of course the coronal is closed, but if the oldest or the last to close is already fused, then the skull is above 50 years of age. Okay, now with the mandible, of course, the mandible can help in age identification. It's very important. The mandible carries teeth, and the sequence of teeth eruption is highly important in age identification. And teeth go through regressive changes. They degenerate with time. So does the alveolar margin. It is the margin of the mandible that carries the teeth. The angle between body and ramus, its shape differs with time. It looks obtuse in infants and old age, and it's right in middle age. I have to say something, that when we identify the age of the mandible, I don't have to say a certain number. I say it's an infant mandible, it's a middle-aged mandible, a mandible of a middle-aged person, or a mandible of an old person. I don't identify a certain age. Okay. Let's start with a sequence of teeth eruption. We have two types of teeth. The teeth that appear first in life, they are called milk or primary teeth. Then they fall and other teeth replace them. The following teeth are called secondary or permanent teeth. Okay. For milk teeth or primary teeth, how do they erupt? The first to appear is the central incisor. The central incisor, let's start pointing. The central incisor is this bone, is this one, and it appears at the age of 6 months. The next to it follows it. It is the lateral incisors. They always follow each other, and it appears at the age of 9 months. The one next to them, the canine, never follows them. So the one that follows them is the first molar, and it appears at the age of 12 months. Then comes the canine, okay, which erupts at the age of 18 months. And finally, the second molar erupts at the age of 24 months, okay. Then the permanent teeth appear. What is the sequence? The first to erupt is not the same as the first as the one that erupts in the primary teeth. Here we start with, if we remember, we have 5 teeth in the primary teeth. The first to appear here is a new one. It's called the first molar. See, I will point at it here. Okay, the first to appear, the first permanent tooth to appear is the first molar. It erupts at the age of 6 years, followed by the central incisor that appears at the age of 7 years, 6, 7. Then the lateral incisor that erupts at the age of 8, 6, 7, 8. We know that canine never follows the lateral incisor. Who comes then? The first premolar. Here we have to say something. The first premolar, it's called premolar because now we have a new molar. In the primary teeth, there was only molars, first molar and second molars. In the permanent teeth, we have three molars, the first, second, third, or the wisdom tooth. The ones that used to be called molars in primary teeth are now called premolar. So the first premolar is actually in the same site as the first molar of primary teeth. It appears at the age of 9 years, followed by the second premolar. Here, the canine is even appears later. Okay, then the canine, which erupts at the age of 11 years, and the second molar erupts at the age of 12 years. Finally, the third molar, which is called the wisdom tooth, appears later in life at the age between the years between 18 and 25 years. So we said mandible helps in age identification through first sequence of eruption, then two other stuff. Okay, the degeneration that occurs at the alveolar margin. What is the alveolar margin? It is the upper border of the mandibles that carries the teeth. With time, the alveolar margin desorbs, degenerates. Can I identify age through it? Yes, because it leads to change in the site of the mental foramen. We will explain this now. There is another thing we said before. It's the angle of the mandible. This is the mandible of an infant. This is the mandible of a middle-aged person, and this is the mandible of an old age. If I look at the angle, what is the angle of the mandible? The angle of the mandible. Well, the angle of the mandible is that part. The mandible has two parts. Okay. Let's draw something. The angle is formed, the mandible has two parts. This is called the ramus of the mandible, and this is called the body of the mandible. This area is called the angle of the mandible. I can see here it's obtuse. Here it's almost right angle, okay? And at the old age it starts being obtuse back again. There is another point that I can depend on, and it's the most important to identify age is through the mental foramen. The mental foramen is an opening that's present in the body of the mandible that nerves emerge from. The mental foramen at birth, it's closer to the lower edge of the mandible. In middle age, it's midway between the upper edge and the lower edge. And in old age, it's almost closer to the upper edge. Why? Because in old age, okay, the alveolar margin, this is called alveolar margin, it degenerates, almost disappears. All this part almost disappears. So the mental foramen looks like it's closer to the alveolar margin and closer to the upper edge of the mandible. Okay, so I can say that this photo is a mandible at birth because the angle is obtuse and because the mental foramen is closer to the lower edge. Here it's of the middle age because the angle is almost right and because the mental foramen is midway between the upper edge and lower edge. And here it's of old age because it's obtuse. Okay, of course it's larger in size than that of the infant and because the mental foramen is closer to the upper edge of the mandible. Okay, now we'll start a very important part in today's section, which is union of epiphysis. Let's start with knowing what is epiphysis. Here, if we look at the bone, we will see that the upper end of the bone is called the epiphysis, and then there is the shaft of the bone, and in between there is a black line. Okay, this black line is air. Bone is white in the X-ray, and air is black. This line, the black line, is the air because the bones aren't united. They are still separated. The upper end of the bone is still separated from its shaft, not united yet, and this is what's called by union of epiphysis. At certain age, the end of the bone unites with its shaft. Okay, I don't see this black line. This is the union of epiphysis. Okay, I can use this age of union to identify the age of the individual. The bones of the upper limbs. In the upper limbs, we have three bones. The bone of the arm is called the humerus, and there are two bones in the forearms are called ulna and radius. Okay. When it comes to the humerus, these are the ages of the union of the different parts of humerus. The first to occur is the union between the trochlea and capitulum. I will have to make sure you study the anatomy very well. Okay, remember anatomy, remember the different parts of the bone. The trochlea and capitulum are the two small bones at the lower end of the humerus. Okay, these bones unite together, attached to each other at the age of 14 years, and then they are attached to the shaft of humerus at the age of 15. So at first, there is the shaft of humerus, there is trochlea and capitulum. Neither are attached to each other. They hold each other hands first at the age of 14, then they unite with the shaft at the age of 15. Then comes who? The lateral epicondyle. It is that part. This part unites with the shaft at the age of 16, followed by the medial epicondyle. It unites with the shaft at the age of 17. Finally, the head of humerus unites with the shaft at the age of 20 years. Emerges. What is the age and say why? This is a humerus. Of course, it's a humerus. It has a head, it has trochlea, capitulum, medial epicondyle, lateral epicondyle. Its size refers to humerus. It looks united. Most of its parts look united. So I start by thinking of what unites last. It's the head. Is the head united? Yes, of course. I can see the head. Here, it's completely united with the shaft, not separated. It's not completely separated, neither there is a faint line of separation. So the head is united. So this is a humerus that's aged more than 20 years if male, because the head of humerus is united with shaft. Okay, now we're still in the upper limbs, but we're in the bones of the forearm. We have the radius and ulna. What are the ages of union? Let's start with the upper end of ulna. Upper end of ulna unites with the shaft at 16 years. Let's imagine the upper limb. I have the humerus, then ulna and radius. Ulna is the bone in the medial side of forearm, okay? Radius is in the bone in the lateral side of the forearm. There is a cross that occurs here. The bone at the upper end of ulna, which is in the medial side, unites with its shaft at 16 years. It's the same age where the lateral epicondyle of the humerus unites with the shaft. On the opposite, the upper end of radius, which is present on the lateral side of the forearm, unites with the shaft at 17 years. It's the same age where the medial epicondyle unites with its shaft. Okay? Both lower ends of ulna and radius unite with shaft at 20 years, which is the same age that head of humerus unites with the shaft. Try to remember it this way. Okay, say we have this picture. What are the ages and why? These are ulna and radius. Both upper ends, both lower ends aren't united. So what is the age? What unites first? The upper ends or lower ends? The upper end. So for ulna, this is an ulna less than 16 years of age if male, because the upper end is not united with the shaft, and this is a radius aged less than 17 years if male, because the upper end is not united with the shaft. Okay, do I ever mention the ages of the lower end not united? No, of course. If the ulna is less than 16 years, so definitely it's less than 18 years. If the radius is less than 17 years, so definitely it's less than 18 years. Okay, so I mentioned, if it's less, I mention the one that unites first and not united. And if all bones are united, like humerus we said before, I mentioned that the oldest part has already been united. Okay, to summarize, to wrap up, the bones of the upper limb, trochlea and capitulum unite together at the age of 14 years. They unite with the shaft of humerus at the age of 15 years. Lateral epicondyle, on the lateral side and its opposite, the upper head of ulna, unite at 16 years, as in the green line. In the brown line, I can see the medial epicondyle uniting with the shaft at 17 years, the same age that the upper head of radius unite with its shaft. There's only one thing we didn't mention before, the bones of the hands. The bones of the hands, the metacarpals and phalanges, unite at 18 years in males. And finally, the head of humerus, the lower ends of radius and ulna, unite at the age of 20 years. Moving to the bones of the lower limb. In the lower limb, we have the bone of the thigh, which is called the femur, and two bones in the leg are called tibia and fibula. And of course, we have the bones of the foot that are called the metatarsals and tarsals. Okay. First things first, the first bone to unite is the lesser trochanter. It's this small projection in the femur. It unites with the shaft at the age of 16, followed by the greater trochanter, a bigger projection in the bone. It unites at the age of 17. And head of femur, lower ends of tibia and distal end of tibia and fibula, and the metatarsals all unite at the age of 18. Everything around the knee unites at the age of 20. The lower ends of femur and tibia and fibula at the age of 21 years. Okay? It's a quiz. What is the age of this bone? This is a femur. Okay? All parts look united. I start asking myself, what unites last? It's of course, at the knee, the lower end of the femur, it unites with the shaft at the age of 21 years in male. So this is a femur aged more than 21 years in males because the lower end of femur is united with the shaft. Okay, another question. What is the age of this bone? Okay, it's a femur, of course, anatomically it's apparent. Almost it looks all not united. The bones, some bones aren't there, some bones seem separated from the shaft. So I start asking myself what unites first. It's the lesser trochanter. The bone is not there. It's separated from the bone. So this is a femur, aged less than 16 years if males, because the lesser trochanter is not united with the shaft. Okay, another question. What is the age of these bones? These are tibia and fibula. I can see that the upper ends aren't united, the lower ends aren't united. What happens first? Of course, the lower ends. The lower ends unite with the shaft at the age of 18. So these are tibia and fibula, aged less than 18 years if male. I keep repeating if male, and sadly, you always forget to write it in the exam, okay? Because of non-union of lower ends of tibia and fibula. Here we have three bones. If I look well at its anatomy, it's a femur and tibia and fibula. Okay, don't assume ever, if you have two bones in the picture, that they are of the same age. Okay, you tell the age of each bone separately. If I look at the femur, okay, the lesser trochanter is not present. The one I encircled, it's not present because it's not united. It's not united, the bone was separated, so it's not here. And the lesser trochanter is the first bone to unite in the lower limb. So this is a femur less than 16 years of age because the lesser trochanter wasn't united with shaft. Of course, never forget the two words, if male, because if this was a female bone, I would have said it's less than 14 years of age. And from the long bones, I cannot identify male from females. I can't identify, so I say that this is a bone less than 16 years of age. Okay, if I look at the femur and the tibia, the lower end, fibula and tibia, the lower end of fibula, it's not even there. Okay, it wasn't united and it's not connected or attached to the bone. And if I look at the tibia, the lower end part of it is present, but there is a line of separation between the shaft and the lower end. So these are tibia and fibula less than 18 years of age because their lower ends are not united with the shafts. Now let's move to the bones of the hip bones. The hip bone is formed of three bones: the iliac bone, the ischial bone, and the pubic bone. This is the iliac bone, this is the pubic bone, and this is the ischial bone. Okay, when do these bones unite together? First, the pubic ramus, this pubic ramus, this is called the inferior pubic ramus, unites with the ischial ramus, that bone, at the age of 6 years. And of course here I don't mention the words if male because before puberty there is no differentiation between male and females. Okay? This is followed by the union of the three bones, the iliac bone, the pubic bone, and the ischial bone, at this Y-shaped suture in the acetabulum, okay, at the age of 15 years in males. Then the epiphysis of the ischial tuberosity, this part of the ischial bone is called ischial tuberosity. This part unites with the rest of the bone at the age of 21 years in males. Finally, the iliac crest, this arch, is called the iliac crest. The iliac crest unites with the rest of the iliac bone at the age of 23 years in males. Now, based on what we said in the previous slide, let's look at this hip. I can see here that the three bones of the hip are separated from each other. This bone looks ununited. Most of it is ununited. What is the first to occur? The union between the pubic ramus and the ischial ramus. So the question is, are they united? No. Here is the pubic ramus and here is the ischial ramus. They are clearly not united. So this is the pelvis of a child aged less than 6 years. No mentioning of the words F male. Same here. We have the child hip bone aged less than 6 years because of non-union between pubic ramus and ischial ramus. I have to remind you that you have to study very well the pictures you have on the atlas, in addition to any other pictures that can be shown in the exam. The exam is not exclusive on the picture of the atlas, but the picture of the atlas are very important to know and memorize, and you would better go to the department and see the bones as well. This is a hip bone. The hip bone, you have to concentrate on one thing. It's an easy bone to identify its sex, okay, whether it's male or female. As evident here, the greater sciatic notch is wide. This is the greater sciatic notch. Okay, wait a minute. The greater sciatic notch is wide, okay, so this is a female hip, clearly. The pubic and ischial rami are united, and the here is a trick. In this picture, you can see that the iliac crest is not united with the rest of the bones, so you can say that this is a female hip aged below 21 years because the iliac crest unites with the hip at 21 in females. This bone is an actual bone in the museum of the department. In it, the iliac tuberosity is not, the ischial tuberosity is not united, but this is not evident in the picture. So the picture as it is, if it's an exam is aged below 21 years. You will find almost the same picture in the atlas written that it's below 19 years because the ischial tuberosity is not united, because this is an actual bone in the museum. Moving to other bones. Clavicle. There are two ends to the clavicle, one called the sternal end and the other is called acromial end. The sternal end is the end of the clavicle that is at the joint of sternoclavicular joints, while the acromial end is the one that's closer to humerus, okay, at the shoulder joint. The sternal end unites at the age of 23 years in males, and the acromial end unites at the age of 18 years in males. Hyoid bone. Okay, as to hyoid bone, the hyoid bone is formed of the following parts. There is the body, there is the lesser cornea, there is the greater cornea of hyoid. Okay, the greater cornea of hyoid bone unites with the body at the age of 40 years. Let's start with some tests. What about these bones? Okay, here I can see an ulna and radius. The upper ends are united, the lower ends are united, so they are the ulna. When I answer it like this. There is an ulna, it's aged more than 20 years because the lower end is united with the shaft, and there is a radius that's aged more than 20 years because the lower end is united with the shaft. Okay, to answer this, we have to identify the bone. This is a tibia, okay? Okay, I can see that the upper end is united, the lower end is united. So this is a tibia aged more than 21 years. Why 21? Because the upper end is united with the shaft and it unites at 21 years if male, okay? Always write if male. What is this bone? It's a mandible. I want to identify its age. Okay, so I can see that the angle between the ramus and mandible is almost right, but I don't want to depend on this. Let's depend on the mental foramen. The mental foramen is almost midway between the upper margin and lower margins of the mandible. So this is a mandible of a middle-aged person. Okay, why? Because of da da da. I don't have to write if male here because I don't specify a certain number, of course. Well, this is the femur. Everything is united. What is the last to occur? The union of the at the knee, the lower end of femur. So when does it occur? At 21 years in males. So this is a femur aged more than 21 years if male because the lower end of the femur is united with its shaft. Or the epiphysis of the lower end. This is how it's supposed to be said. The epiphysis of the upper end, the epiphysis of the lower end. Don't get confused. These are two different bones that are connected by a hinge, like you can see in the picture. We just want to demonstrate here what in the book you will find this part about the medullary cavity. The medullary cavity means the cavity that contains the bone marrow. Okay, in the age of 30, it reaches the anatomical neck, and in the age of 33 in the age of 30 it reaches the surgical neck, and in the first part, like the above part of the bone, and in the age of 33 it reaches the anatomical neck. Okay, now we're done with the bone. We know how to answer the bone. I wanted to comment on something in the if the picture is of a hip bone is a bone that's easily distinguished if male or female. So if you can from the picture tell it's a male hip bone or if a female hip bone, you have to customize the age accordingly. Like if it's the ischial tuberosity is not united, and you can tell it's less than 21 years, but you can see that the greater sciatic notch is wide and this is a female hip, so we write down that this is a female hip aged less than 19 years. If any bone, not just the hip bone, any bone, if you can tell either it's male or female, then you customize the age. If you can't, like in long bones, you write the words if male. Moving to the x-rays. How do we answer the x-ray question? We have to say what is the bone. Like I mentioned before, if it's a bone, I write its name, I write the part. The same goes for x-ray. I write the name of the bones or I write the name of the joint. Okay? And again, if I can identify the sex, I mention it, or I mention the words if male, and finally I write down the age and why I answered the question. Okay, so this is an x-ray on upper limb on the elbow joint. Most ends seem not united, so I ask myself what unites first. It is the trochlea and capitulum uniting together at the age of 14 in males. They are not united here. Remember, in the X-ray, bones are white, air is black. So the non-union is represented as black color between the bones. Here, there is separation between trochlea and capitulum. So this is the answer. Elbow joint, lower part of humerus and upper parts of radius and ulna, aged less than 14 years if male. This is X-ray on upper limbs. Everything is united. I can look at trochlea and capitulum united. They are united with the shaft. Condyles are united. Upper ends of radius and ulna are united. So here I have to ask myself what happens last. The last thing to happen is the union of the medial epicondyle with the shaft of humerus and the upper end of radius with the shaft with its shaft. These occur at 17 years. So this is X-ray on the elbow joint. The person is aged more than 17 years if male because of union of the medial epicondyle with the shaft of humerus and the epiphysis of upper end of radius. First, we identify the bones. This is a shoulder joint. I can see the clavicle. I can see the humerus. Bones seem united. The last thing to unite is the head of humerus. The head of humerus unites with the shaft of humerus at the age of 20 in males. So this is left shoulder joint aged more than 20 years if male. Next, this is an X-ray of the hand and the lower part of radius and ulna. I have two ages here. Metacarpals unite at age of 18, lower ends of radius and ulna unite at the age of 20. So I can say safely that this is an X-ray of the lower ends of radius and ulna and the hand aged more than 20 years, okay? Because the lower ends of the epiphysis or the epiphysis of radius and ulna are united with the shaft. If you didn't look well, if you just look at the hand and see the metacarpals united, you will see that it's more than 18 years. You got the answer wrong. Look at all the bones in the picture. Same view, but you can see that things are different here. If I look at the Epiphysis of metacarpal bones, it's not united. If I look at the lower ends of radius and ulna, it's not united. The age is less than the least, less than 18 years if male. Okay, this is the answer. Okay. Of course, the lower ends of radius and ulna aren't united. If it's less than 18, then definitely it's less than. This is X-ray on the lower limbs. I won't always say this in the head of the question. You have to know the anatomy, you have to know the bones. I can see the hip, I can see the head of femur and the beginning of its shaft. Okay, clearly the head of femur is united with the shaft. This occurs at 18 years of age. Lesser trochanter is united, it occurs at 16. Greater trochanter is united, occurs at 17. So this is anteroposterior view on the hip joint aged more than 18 years if males. I can look at the ages of union of hip, but let's be honest, all I can see here is the acetabulum. The age of union of acetabulum is 15. I already know it's more than 18 because it's the head of femur is united. Okay, here I can see that the head of femur is not united with the shaft. I can see that the hip bones, there are some non-union. I start with the least. The pubic ramus and ischial ramus, they are not united. So this is a child hip aged less than 6 years. If I look at the acetabulum here I can see that the acetabulum, the bones aren't united. Okay, and of course the head of femur is not united. So the answer is hip bone of child aged less than 16 years, no mentioning of the word if male because there is no sex differentiation in this age. Here is hip 2. If I look at the pubic and ischial rami, no, actually they are united, okay, here. But if I look at the acetabulum, it's not united. Here I have to put an age range. I have to say that it's more than 6 years because pubic and ischial rami are united, but it's less than 15 years if male because the hip, ischium, and ilium aren't united in the This is the lower limb. Okay, you can see the lower end of femur, the upper ends of tibia and fibula. Everything is united. So this is all more than 20 years 21 years of age if male. And when I say the cause, I have to mention all the bones. Okay, the lower end of femur is united with shaft, upper ends of tibia and fibula are united with their shaft. Here is the same view. Lower end of femur, upper end of tibia, they are not united. Neither of them is united with the shaft. You can clearly see the black line of separation of between epiphysis and the shaft. So it's less than 21 years if male. I can also see the same view. Okay. This is and oh, here's the difference. That's why I'm saying we have to look at all the ends of all the bones in the x-ray. I can clearly see that the lower end of femur and upper end of tibia aren't united with their shaft. I could mistakenly say that the answer is less than 21 years. But if I look close at the lower end of tibia and fibula, they are also not united here at the white arrows. So the answer is less than 18 years if male. Okay, let's get back to the pretest. We asked how to verify the age of 22-year-old male. Okay, 22-year-old male. I don't have something that unites at the age of 22. Okay, so I have to say that it's older than 21 and less than 23. What are the events that occur at 21? It's more than 21 years because the lower end of femur and the upper end of tibia and fibula are united with their shaft. And epiphysis of ischial tuberosity is united with the rest of ischial bone. These are the events that occur at 21 years. And it lasts 23 years because if I look at the base of skull, basioccipital and basisphenoid suture, is it united? If I look at the clavicle, the sternal end of clavicle isn't united with the shaft. And if I look at the hips, the epiphysis of iliac crest isn't united. Of course, if the question is about a female, I have to write down the numbers in front of me, transform it into female numbers in order not to make mistakes. Thanks, doctors. I hope this was interesting and useful. Any questions, you can always come to the department to ask us.